Bienvenidos a Tres Respuestas, un espacio de conversación, de discusión y de propuestas. Nuestro invitado de hoy es Nat Ware. Él es australiano, formado en el Reino Unido y una de las voces más autorizadas a nivel mundial en lo que se conoce como inversión de impacto e innovación social. Es PhD de la Universidad de Oxford y una de sus principales tesis que le permitió obtener ese grado tiene que ver con cómo escalar y mejorar el financiamiento para la inversión de impacto y la innovación social. Por eso, Nat Ware no solamente es fundador de lo que se conoce como 180 grados Consulting, quizás la consultora más importante que hay en el mundo para nuevas organizaciones no gubernamentales y particularmente para aquellas enfocadas en la juventud. Y también es el fundador de Forte, un sistema de inversión de impacto para la salud y para la educación. Nat, such a pleasure to have you in Colombia. Thank you for being in the Innovation for Development Foundation. And thank you also for participating in our annual event.
No, it's great to be here, and thank you for the invitation.
Well, let me start with one question. Who is Nat Ware? How would you describe yourself, and how would you describe your life process since your early childhood in Australia, then growing up in the UK, then embracing high graduate degrees, and then trying to shape and reshape the form in which impact investment and social innovation takes place around the world?
Well, that's a big question to get us started, but I view myself as very much a global citizen. I don't view myself as tied down to any particular place, and I'm trying to do my small part to improve the world and leave it better than I found it. I've always been someone who has thought deeply about issues, and I've always believed that you can't solve today's problems using the same thinking that created it. And so a lot of my work has been thinking about how can we improve the way that things are done, and how can we create structures and systems that benefit those people who need it the most. So I grew up in Sydney. My parents are both school teachers. So from an early age, I was very passionate about social impact and education. And my parents always encouraged me to, try to make a positive difference in the lives of other people. And in some ways, my life journey has a bit mirrored the journey of the impact investing ecosystem at large. When I was in high school, I had a very binary conception of the world, thinking that there were just non-profits and for-profits, and you only either made a lot of money or you did a lot of good. So I had that binary conception. I thought the way you change the world is you just do fundraising and then donate that money. So that's what I did. I raised money. I built some schools in Mozambique. I raised money to build an orphanage in Thailand. And then it was only in my first year of undergraduate studies at Sydney University that I came across this idea that doing good is as much an intellectual endeavor as it is an emotional endeavor, and how you approach problems is more important than just how much money you throw at it. And so I wanted a way that top university students, top young people could donate with their minds, not just with their money. So I started a nonprofit called 180 Degrees Consulting. That's now the world's largest volunteer consultancy. Ran that for a while, spent a bit of time in the UK to do some grad study, and then, thought about how we can change the way that we, invest in human capital around the world, how we fund education and healthcare, and then ultimately started a new social venture called Forte based on that. So it's been a journey. Happy to dive into any of that, but ultimately, at the end of my life, I don't care if I'm the wealthiest man in the cemetery, but I do want to feel like I've, made a small difference in some way.
So it's a big story. It's great accomplishments, but I have to ask about your steps and your pass through Oxford University, because you decided to obtain a PhD degree, and it was then when you started to present the concept of a project that later became Forte. And in that project, what you wanted to do is increase the impact investment in healthcare and education, but also changing the way in which the funding takes place, and also improving a lot the financial instruments to make an impact in those two critical areas. And I have to say, your thesis didn't have any comments at all, which meant that it was literally, in terms of Oxford standards, once in a lifetime situation. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what was that project about, and how it became Forte, and how is Forte organized today?
It's a great question. And at the start of my PhD, I think one of my big frustrations with the world is that there are literally hundreds of millions of people around the world who have inherent talent. Hidden talent is everywhere. It's everywhere in Colombia. It's everywhere around the world. And it frustrated me that there are hundreds of millions of people who have enormous potential but are unable to realize their potential. And so I wanted a way that we could increase high quality education and training to those people who might not otherwise have access to it. The first half of my PhD research was looking at all the ways that we currently finance education and training around the world, everything from social impact bonds to income share agreements. And I basically became more and more convinced that while some of those approaches are pushing in the right direction, they all have big challenges that will prevent them from scaling and having the impact that we want. And so as part of my PhD research, I worked out that any way to finance education should have these 16 key characteristics, key properties. I proved that no existing approach satisfies more than 8 of them, and then showed that the only way you can achieve these 16 desirable outcomes is with a new approach that no one in the world was doing. And I called that approach the Forte model, standing for financing of return to employment. And it's essentially a way of having as much impact as scholarships, but with far more scalability. Or sometimes I describe it as a way to finance education at no cost to individuals and no cost to governments, and without relying on philanthropy. I'm happy to explain how that works, if that's useful.
Of course.
So the way the Forte model works is we can basically use private capital from foundations or impact investors or other investors to cover the cost of high quality training for those who might not otherwise have access. Particularly, for example, unemployed youth who might not be in a job at the moment and might be struggling. So we can use that private capital to fund training and support for people who need it. The people who receive that training and support don't pay anything at all. Nothing now, nothing in the future. So there's no debt, there's no chance of exploitation at all. But the idea is that training, if it works, leads to greater employment, greater incomes, and therefore ultimately greater government income tax revenue as a result. And so the idea is that we could have agreements with governments where governments just pass back into the fund a percentage of the increase in the income tax revenue the government receives that's attributable to the retrained individuals for a couple of years after training. As an example, say there's 10,000 young people who are unemployed and have been unemployed for several years. Now, they're not earning an income. They're probably struggling. The government's not getting any income tax revenue. So we could fund their training, help them get great jobs, close skills gaps, train them in the areas a company needs. If it doesn't work, the government doesn't pay anything at all. And if it does work, the government just passes back what the government otherwise would not have had, a portion of the extra benefit. And so I do really think that that is a win-win situation. Fantastic for individuals. As I said, doesn't get any better, as much impact as scholarships. From a government standpoint, doesn't worsen the budget. The government never pays for something that doesn't work. The government gets the extra revenue first, so it's good from a cash flow standpoint, and the increase in revenue is always greater than the cost, so it always makes economic sense. This has been endorsed by the World Economic Forum, and the World Economic Forum said that it pays for itself in a guaranteed way. And then from the perspective of investors, I think this is the best model of impact investing because there's perfect alignment of social impact and financial return. The way investors get their money back is only if the education actually works and actually helps people and actually leads to good outcomes. So everyone's pushing in the same direction. Everyone's going for jobs, quality jobs, economic growth, greater productivity. So I very much view it as almost trickle-up economics. Let's help those who are struggling, then benefits flow up through the system.
Why did you pick Medellin, Colombia, to be one of those places where Forte was starting to expand?
We very much see Colombia as having the potential to be the next Silicon Valley of Latin America. There's so much hidden talent, hidden potential all across the country. And that's what we've seen in Medellin. For our first rollout in Medellin, we've helped 270 people, mostly from stratas 1 and 2, to get trained up into tech jobs. And there have been countless stories of lives that are being transformed. One person that comes to mind is a guy called Christian. He was a Rappi delivery cyclist for 9 years. So he spent 9 years cycling around Medellin delivering food, struggling to make ends meet, struggling to provide for his family. And within just 6 to 9 months, he was earning 6 times that as a result of being a part of the Forte program. And now he works for a big IT consulting company. And he told me that finally he can dream. Finally, the universe of possibilities has opened up. Finally, he feels like he's a good dad. And so it's stories like that where with just a small amount of support, people can transform their lives and the lives of their families. So we're very proud of the fact that the first ever rollout of Forte was in Colombia. We launched in Colombia beginning of 2022, 2.5 years ago. And since then, other countries have looked to Colombia, seen that it's worked so well here, and then copied it. So because of our work in Colombia, we then expanded to Costa Rica and to Puerto Rico, and we're about to launch in Peru. And so Colombia has very much been the pioneer of this new approach. And more generally, we do think that the way that we finance education needs to change. The default way that we finance education around the world is to pay for inputs, to write a check, to pay a certain amount for training. But the reality is that leads to a lot of waste. Most of the funding for education and training around the world has little or no impact. And so what we very much stand for at Forte is the idea that instead of paying for inputs, we should pay for outcomes. We should pay if someone gets a quality job on a good salary. We should pay if learning actually improves. Because when we pay for outcomes, that leads to greater incentive alignment. It enables training providers to not cut corners and do the bare minimum, but they're actually incentivized to, be responsive to industry demand, to be tailored to individual circumstances. It also leads to less waste. It means that governments and other funders don't pay if it doesn't work. And it leads to better selection of who does the training. If a training provider is bad, they're not going to want to be paid for outcomes. If a training provider is great, they're okay with that. So it actually makes it easier to determine who to give contracts to and who to give funding to. And so it's useful in that sense as well.
And how do you see the present and future of impact investment, and how can the Forte model allow maybe other organizations, maybe donors, maybe companies, maybe governments to embrace the values of Forte and trying to create those strategic alliances to scale, to sustain, and to transform society?
I think this is very much the start of impact investing, and I think it'll only become more and more mainstream. For too long, people have assumed that the only way you can make money is if you don't do good. And people have assumed there's a trade-off between a social return and a financial return. But I think Forte is a great example of the capacity for people to do good and do well simultaneously. Now, even for foundations, I think Forte is a great model of philanthropy, because with the Forte model, you can help 7 times as many people with the same amount of capital. The usual way that scholarship endowments work is you have a big endowment, say 100 million, you invest that endowment, make say 5% each year. So it takes 100 million for a philanthropist to have $5 million of scholarships each year. With our approach, we can fully recycle capital in 2 to 3 years with our model. And so that means that if a philanthropist has 100 million, we could give away 30 to 40 million in scholarships every year with the same amount of capital, and therefore help 6, 7, 8 times as many students. So I think that we need to be innovative when it comes to philanthropy. We need to be innovative in how we use our capital. And I do encourage all those who, are privileged to be managers of capital, controllers of capital, who are thinking about how to allocate their capital, to try to not only make a financial return, but try to make a positive impact in the world as well.
How would you define the combination of social innovation, impact investment, and the usage of new technologies like AI?
I think AI will be hugely transformative in the world. And I think that it is really, really important for those who care about development and care about the world to look at how we can utilize new technologies to actually help us achieve our goals and objectives. Certainly, one thing about AI is I think it will lead to more rapid change in the nature of work and the work that we do. My granddad sadly passed away just this week, and he was an accountant for 65 years. Those days of where you're in one job for 65 years, I think are numbered. And we're moving more to a world where people will do many, many different jobs throughout their lives. And so instead of just being educated at one point in our life at the age of 20 or 25 and living off that, we need to change to a model of training work, and we need to make sure that our systems adapt to that new reality. And so I do think the world is pushing in the direction of innovation and alignment of social and financial returns. But you're right that some of these new technologies will be hugely transformative, and we need to not just be responsive to those technologies, but to actually be proactive about embracing them and trying to use them for the benefit of humanity.
How do you think the allocation of global liquidity is working for social impact or for impact investment? And what can be done in order to bring more of the liquidity that is available in the markets to trust and support projects like the one Forte has been putting in place?
A few thoughts come to mind. First of all, one of the challenges when it comes to capital allocation is creditworthiness. And a lot of funders and investors want to invest in disadvantaged individuals, but are concerned about risk and risk profile. What we've tried to do with our approach at Forte is how can you invest in disadvantaged individuals, but with the creditworthiness of governments and almost have the best of both worlds. And that's what we've tried to do. So I think there are various innovative approaches for how we can unlock capital, whether it's through guarantees or insurance or other measures. Another thought that comes to mind is, I'm a big believer in social impact and social innovation. Sadly, a lot of investors, whenever they hear that, assume that they're being asked to sacrifice financial returns. And so in some ways, social impact becomes mainstream when we don't need to say that, when the two are one and the same. Because at the moment, unfortunately, even though the impact investing field is increasing, it's still a very small portion of the global capital stock.
Have you been able to see some of the training programs that we have developed in Innovation for Development Foundation, for example, the Dreamers and Makers, where we select out of a group of maybe 650 applicants, 150 leaders between 18 and 25 who are making an impact in their communities, and they want to come to this acceleration program, expose themselves to international audiences, be able to pitch. So my question is, how do you think Forte can scale in such a way that can have partners locally in Colombia to give the best tuition or expertise for those students who, no matter what, their aim in life is to do much better for their communities?
Well, the first thing to say is I was privileged to learn about the work of the IND Foundation throughout this year, and it's amazing what you're doing. I'm a big believer in the potential of young people. Like, they're the real heroes. We're just trying to support them. And we've got to remember that it's young people who are the ones, we have a saying at Forte, we want to back those who back themselves. And there are so many people who are craving opportunity, and when they get opportunities like what you're providing with the foundation, they grasp it, and the benefits are huge. And one of the benefits about working with young people is that whatever change you can make, it has a lifetime of impact. If you can change the career trajectory of someone, that's not just 6 months of impact or 12 months of impact, it's 30, 40, 50, 60 years of impact, and they'll probably impact other people as well. So I think it's amazing what you're doing, and certainly I want to support in any way I can, either in a personal capacity or through Forte or through another nonprofit that I started called 180 Degrees Consulting. And we also work with young people around the world, trying to give them opportunities to start new ventures and support existing ventures as well. So congratulations on what you've achieved.
Thank you so
far.
much, Nat. Well, you're also coming to participate in our annual event about the present and future of AI. And I need to ask you, what's your feeling about the usage of AI for impact investing and also for social innovation?
I think the first thing to say about AI is, as you say, we do need to be aware of the risk, that it is slightly a double-edged sword, but I think some of the criticism of AI is a bit overblown. For example, I don't think AI is going to, replace all jobs, as some people have claimed. I think that those who will succeed are those who can utilize AI to be more productive and more efficient. In other words, it's not really going to be a choice of human labor versus AI labor. I think a hybrid combination in the future will win out and be superior. And so I'm really interested in innovations that embrace that combination, and how do we sort of utilize that to move humanity forward. Certainly when it comes to impact investing, I do think the sector is still a bit slow. I don't think it's embraced it as much as it should. And I think traditionally, a lot of nonprofits, sadly, have not been as innovative as they should have been. I've worked with so many nonprofits around the world who, some of them sadly do things just because that's how they've always been done. And one of the things we try to do with 180 Degrees is, ask them to, question whether just because you've done something in the past, is that necessarily the best way going forward? And so it really is important for everyone who is involved in nonprofits, social impact, social innovation, to look at the trends that will shape humanity over the next 10, 20 years, and look at how they need to adapt as a result.
If we have to adaptate to face this revolution of AI and all this technology, but at the same time we need to increase the impact that we produce positively in the global south, what do you think is missing in the global south in order for us to attract more resources, more programs, more projects that can last more and can help us close the social divide?
It's a good question, and even though we're seeing some increasing flow of capital, it's certainly not what we should have. And I certainly think there's so much potential in a place like Colombia for greater investment and greater innovation. And so certainly I hope through my work that I attract more investment into both companies in Colombia, but also individuals as well. Certainly, anyone who fights globalization, I think, is on a losing battle. I think we still need to embrace the fact that broadly the world is becoming more global. Companies are more and more willing to hire people from everywhere. And so certainly I know a lot of US companies are very open to hiring Colombian talent. And that's both beneficial and also a risk. Obviously, on one hand, we want to make sure that Colombian talent works for Colombian companies and stays in Colombia. On the other hand, we do want to give people global experience and global expertise so that they can then contribute as well. And so we do need to think about how we can utilize global opportunities, but make sure the benefits don't just accrue elsewhere, and that talent actually sort of contributes most productively to Colombian society.
How do you think societies like ours can promote re-skilling for people who are about 40 or 50 that still have a lot to do work, but what can be offered for them in terms of reskilling through platforms that or are they condemned not to be winners? I mean, how do they adapt to this change, and what kind of outlet would you recommend for those who want to hear from you? Which are the best ways in order to learn about AI, to understand how AI is produced, but also then to use AI to favor their own productivity?
It's very, very important because I think one of the cultural shifts we need to make as a society is move away from this idea that the right time to get educated and get trained is when you're either going through high school or when you're in your 20s. Societies and countries that stick to that mindset and mentality will not move forward at the rate of other countries. And we need to make it the norm for people in their 40s, in their 50s, in their 60s to get retrained, to learn new skills, to have career changes. Sadly, in different places around the world, that's still almost looked down on, or people are a bit hesitant to do that. But we need to make it mainstream because that's the way society is moving. Obviously, the challenge there is how do we support people during that transition? Often when people get educated early in their life, they're supported by their family. And so they can take time off from work to do study and to do training. But if someone's 40 or 50 and they're the provider, they have a family that they need to support, it gets much more difficult. So that's one of the reasons why I'm such a big believer in what we're doing at Forte, because it is at no cost to individuals. In addition to working with different governments, departments, and agencies, we also work closely with companies as well. So we work with companies where the companies pay for us to do talent development pipelines, and we then provide training to people later in life. We sometimes refer to as encore careers, because we want people to have a second chance, a new career, to move ahead. And so we work with companies who can also support people in that talent development. But the key thing also is that there are so many free resources available as well. And so I do encourage people to embrace what is available. A lot of learning can happen independently and online. And all it takes is a bit of determination, a bit of resilience, and people can change their career paths, earn better salaries, support their families, and get ahead, even later in life. So it is certainly a mistake for us to have the mindset that training is for people in their 20s and not for people in their 40s or 50s.
How do you think, for example, impact investment is going to evolve with the help of AI to analyze the right projects, the right places to scale up, to sustain, but also to diversify the way in which a platform allocates resources that come from investors that want to see a result?
I certainly think one of the ways that AI can be used is to reduce bias when it comes to investing. A lot of people have inherent biases, even if they don't realize it. And so using AI to reduce bias is one thing. I think secondly, AI can be used to present people with opportunities for investment that they might not have otherwise come across and otherwise seen. And I think a third approach, which I'm a big believer in, is just being more rigorous and evidence-based in the way that we approach things. Certainly, we don't do any training ourselves. We work with over 100 of the world's best training providers, and we're very big on transparency and standardization. One of the things when it comes to training is, every training provider in the world is going to say they're great, say they're amazing. But obviously there's big variation. Some are great and some are not great. And so what we want to do is use technology and use data to bring transparency to that. We want to make sure that funding flows to the best providers and not to those that are not good. And we want to make sure that training providers are aligned so that they're focused on making sure they're training in the right areas, not doing training for the sake of training. And they're actually, getting people quality jobs that matter and where people can stay in those jobs. And what we're all about is tracking those outcomes very rigorously and making sure that data is transparent, that there's accountability, that funders can see what's working and what's not, and that people pay for what works and don't pay for what doesn't work. And so more generally, when we think about technology trends, whether it's AI or big data or other advances, where the world is moving is to a world of greater transparency. And I think that's only a good thing, because it means that the resources that we as a society have can be better deployed to the most effective interventions rather than just allocated without as much rigor.
There's something that comes to my mind about how to make a bigger impact, and that's why having a pattern of consistency is important, being coherent, being congruent, having care, and maybe, if I could say, building confidence, it takes place. So you put together all this energy, you put together this organization, but there's still a lot to be done, and that requires a massive mobilization of resources. That's why you're thinking, okay, let's try to find attractive, innovative financial mechanism to pay for this. But how do you foresee the role of the private sector? Wouldn't it maybe be, in the case of climate change, to have green taxonomies, social impact bonds connected with some of the KPIs that government define? How do you think there can be a great possibility of having those projects, having the leaders being from the private sector attracted to those leaders, and then being able to massively mobilize resources?
Yeah, it's hugely important that we engage the private sector. I definitely think there's a role for government in all of this, but we need to tap into private sector innovation and investment, and the private sector also needs to step up as well. One of the ways that we work with the private sector is also enabling the private sector to, again, pay for what works and not pay for what doesn't. So one of the things we find in Colombia is particularly for international companies, when their employees can speak English, it often leads to higher salaries, greater sales, greater productivity. But some companies are sick of paying for English language training that doesn't work, where it doesn't lead to any improvement. So one of the things that we offer companies is don't pay just for training up front, only pay if your employees actually improve their English from A1 to A2, from A2 to B1, from B1 to B2, from B2 to C1. Only pay if you're actually getting the results. I think we also need to enable the private sector to benefit from their investments that they make in this, but do so in a way that incentives are aligned. I'm really passionate about environmental sustainability, and obviously Colombia is, obviously home to a large portion of the Amazon, which is in desperate need of protection. But how can we sort of support communities that are reliant on that at the same time as protecting the environment? You can't do that without engaging the private sector and providing people with alternative livelihoods and alternative ways that they can sort of make ends meet. Obviously a key part of that is utilizing innovation as well in that process. So we do need to do things differently. We do need a multi-stakeholder approach, and we do need to look for win-wins. And I love that the IND Foundation is nonpartisan. Too often we think that solutions are only left-wing or only right-wing, whereas there are real solutions that should appeal across the political spectrum. Even Forte, like those on the right wing should love it because it taps into private sector innovation and investment. It's fiscally responsible. It doesn't worsen the budget. There's not waste because you only pay for what works. But at the same time, we protect individuals. There's no debt. There's no chance of exploitation. And often, the left says, we want free education, and the right says that's not fiscally responsible. But there are solutions that can be nonpartisan, that actually achieve fiscal responsibility while helping those who need it the most. And so I do think that in all aspects of our work, we need to look for those win-wins and move away from being very partisan.
Nat, if you were to recommend to a young social innovator in Colombia, in Latin America, or a social entrepreneur about what are the principles that, based on your experience, can be successfully used in order to reach results, what would you recommend?
I'd say a few things. The first thing that I'd say is, changing the world is hard, but it's also never been easier. There's so many resources, there's so many opportunities out there that I encourage people to try to think of how they can not only move their own lives forward, but also contribute productively to broader society. The second thing that I'd say is, when it comes to making a difference in the world, people often assume that in order to make a difference, you need to bear enormous financial risk. And there is obviously financial risk often involved. I have never taken $1 from my nonprofit 180 Degrees. I've worked there now for 17 years and have never taken a cent. So there's obviously some financial sacrifice that is made, but there's another risk apart from financial risk, and that is the risk of regret. The risk that later on in life you'll look back and say, I wish I'd tried this. I wish I'd tried to start my own venture. I wish I'd tried to make a difference. I wish I'd taken more risk. And when we view the risk of regret alongside financial risk, the two somewhat cancel out and maybe help us make decisions that we're less likely to have regrets on later in life. The third thing that I'd say is, often people want to help you, want to support you, and opportunities are out there if you look for them. And sometimes you do need to ask people for their support. But if you don't ask, the answer is a guaranteed no. And if you ask, you might just get a yes. If you ask, you're only increasing your odds. 0% if you didn't ask, but if you ask, it might be 1% or 5% or 10%, but you're only increasing your odds. So I do encourage people to, look beyond themselves, look beyond their families, look beyond their communities. There's so many opportunities out there. It's a global world. You can be living in Medellin and work for a company in Australia these days. You can make a difference in a variety of ways. And so those are a few thoughts that come to mind.
Nat, my last question. If you were to recommend a book, what would you recommend?
At the moment, I'm actually reading a book called Big Bets by the head of the Rockefeller Foundation that tells his sort of life story, and from his work at the Gates Foundation to the work now at the Rockefeller Foundation of how do we sort of dream big, but actually make sure those dreams don't remain as dreams but become reality. And he was heavily involved in the work to make vaccines around the world far more widespread. And I've really enjoyed reading that because it did sort of reinforce that idea that we shouldn't just be consumers of the world. A lot of people live in the world and just want to consume things and live in it and enjoy life. And I think that book and many other books as well just reinforce that idea that, we should really be creators of the world. The world is there to be designed. We should be architects. We should think not just of how we can benefit ourselves, but how we can redesign systems, redesign businesses so that it does move humanity forward and have those win-wins. So that's one book. My favorite movie is Shawshank Redemption, but I'm not sure that's...
Andy Dufresne.
Yeah, I love that movie. I'm not sure that has really impacted me from a career standpoint, but I do love it as a movie.
Oh, it's a movie about resilience as well.
It is. And it's a movie about being positive in the face of adversity. And the reality is everyone faces setbacks. I've faced setbacks. I'm sure you have. Everyone does. But the challenge is to be what I call a dissatisfied optimist. Dissatisfied with the state of the world so that you want change, but optimistic about the future. Because if you're not optimistic about the future, it's hard to bring people along with you. And so I encourage everyone to have that mindset of a dissatisfied optimist.
Nat, has been a pleasure to hear from you, to have you here in Bogota, to see how you're combining technology, impact investment, social innovation, how we can make a difference. And I just want also to congratulate you for what you have achieved with Forte and 180 Degrees Consulting. So thank you for being with us in Tres Respuestas.
And thank you to you as well. Obviously, a lot of people end their political career and go off into the sunset and sort of just enjoy their life. But I love the fact that you're still striving to improve Colombian society, protect the environment, and you're not only focused on Colombia, but have that global outlook as well, which I think is hugely important. So thank you
so
from
much.
me.
All the best.